Welcome to the Practice Podcast, conversations probing the nature of practice. I'm your host, Dave Fearon, co-author with Peter Vale of the digital book on Practice as a Way of Being. Find it at mylibrary.world. And now to our show. I was just telling HR Huntsman a little bit about my boyhood in Maine. The poor guy, we just get acquainted, and I'm telling him stories about me as a kid. But I wanted to tell him why I love to do the podcast. And what I told him was that my grandmother used to like to bring me in town on the bus. And while she was very dignified, had the hat and the gloves and the matching pocketbook and everything, I'm there chatting up everyone around me. You know, old lady over there, oh, I like your shoes. Where'd you get the shoes? You know, and all that stuff. And my grandmother's going, David, don't be so forward. Don't be so forward. Well, I made a career out of it, being forward. And so finding HR Huntsman through the very networks that are out there now to help us basically discover each other, to develop our brands, to become a presence, if you will, in a very, very crowded world of, in his case, leadership and coaching and organization change. And particularly what I'm kind of curious about HR is you helping people get a sort of a grasp of the business, as you say, from several systems perspectives. So there's a lot there. And so I'm going to start talking about me and start talking about you. Oh, I also asked HR if I could reveal his actual name, and he said yes, it's HR. But my friends call me H.
That's right.
So, well, since I blurbed away on my early days when I noticed something that's been part of me for my life, can you think of something back in your days in New Mexico, HR, where you kind of knew somehow you were going to be involved in the work you're doing today?
Well, first of all, Dave, thank you for inviting me on the bus, so to speak. I'm honored. We're 3,000 miles apart.
Yeah.
You in the northeast, me in the northwest, but I'm happy to pull up a seat next to you and chat. So going back to New Mexico, this is an integral part of my story, as your childhood is in yours. I was born into a really dysfunctional, alcoholic, abusive home. My dad died when I was really young, and several stepdads after that, men in and out of my life. And that dysfunction, that brokenness, that anger and alcoholism propelled me out of the home and into the military. But what it did is it gave me a desire I wanted to take that pain and make something powerful out of it. It gave me a desire to make an impact around the world.
Yeah.
So at age 28, I started my first company as a nonprofit humanitarian organization. We worked around the world, ended up growing from scratch to very large, doing projects in Kenya and Uganda and India, all across Mexico, here in the States. And all of that was fueled by a desire to make the world a little bit better place. And I know that sounds sugary and sappy and cliche, but I wanted to do something. I wanted to break the cycle I've been handed and do something different.
Not a cliche at all, man. That when one thinks about how you could have gone,
yeah,
all of us who've had any alcoholism in our family systems
right.
know there's absolutely nothing below the bottom but more bottom.
Right.
And you chose to go the other way. Now, did the military really make a big difference then in order to help you get out of that sort of syndrome?
So what happened was, grew up really poor. I was called white trash, trailer trash my whole life. Kids like you don't go to college. You either be a ditch digger, you join the military. I was a pretty sharp kid. I had written a couple of computer programs. I even had them copyrighted before I left high school. This was right when desktop computing was coming in back in the 70s and 80s. So I was pretty sharp. And here's the thing that I learned then, and I teach and reinforce now. I knew, Dave, that I would have to change my thinking if I was going to change my future.
Hmm.
So I could not continue the thinking that was being handed to me, this dysfunctional, broken, dead end thinking where drugs were the escape. I knew I had to change my thinking, or I had to change that generational thinking. And so now I teach everywhere I go. We did that in our nonprofit and now in Leaders Edge. The power of thinking differently, of thinking creatively, of innovating and building teams of people and businesses that have meaning and purpose.
Mm.
So all that dysfunction and pain and brokenness, what I learned was the power of better thinking.
Yeah. Well, I want to underscore and put a circle around that for the whole world, particularly, but certainly for anyone I can think of, thinking is probably going to be our most competitive edge, talking about your notion of edge, because the artificial intelligence is already making it look like it's thinking for us.
Right.
And in many ways, it's very powerful, and it's going to be ever more powerful.
Sure.
So what you and I are, and we're in league here, because I think while we're going to help people accept how to make it use as a tool, we also have to help people understand we have an obligation now to think better,
Yeah.
to think beyond what an algorithm can tell a mega computer to do. And I think that's a great challenge. But now you're out there in the world and you're telling people it's important that they change your thinking. If you had 10 people, what would be your success in getting how many of them to actually reset their heads and start to think differently?
So
All 10?
no, no. Let me frame in my line of work how I'd like people to think differently.
Okay.
One of the biggest challenges I give to people is that in business, we need to understand that businesses are social systems.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the ways I try to get CEOs and business owners to think differently is to think of themselves as the leader of a social system, not just a business of transactions. So if I can get these leaders to think as organizational psychologists rather than just managers, they'll have a much greater chance of succeeding, because these human and social systems are powerful if you understand how people work
I
and
love that.
understand what inspires and motivates and demotivates them. So
Mm-hmm.
getting these leaders to think about their business not just transactionally, but you have humans around you, and to understand how humans work as social creatures. That's one of the ways I like to get the leaders I work with to think differently. Now, you ask about a ratio. I would say if I'm batting 500, I am killing it. If I can
Yeah.
get half the leaders I work with to really see their organizations as social systems and think about the people they're working with as social creatures and lead in that manner, I'm winning every day.
You see, as I've been teaching, writing about, and studying what you're just said for a long while.
Yeah.
And the dichotomy, to use a fancy word, has always been very clear. You know, the theory X and the theory Y. There are those managing and maybe even owning and managing organizations who will not see people as anything other than a factor of their profitability,
Right.
disposable and interchangeable,
Yeah.
which is to exaggerate the point.
Right.
But that set of mind has been around for over centuries.
Sure.
But in recent time, it started to really catch us basically with our industrial pants down when the Japanese came along in the 80s, as you recall, probably when you're just kicking off your career. And they were building much better cars and appliances. And so we asked the question, well, how do they do that? They don't have the materials we have. They don't even have a space to put up a factory. It's such a crowded place. And the answer was they have enormous respect for each other in teams, and the top leaders have a philosophy, which I used to try to watch American management leaders to grapple with. It's called going to the Gemba, and their obligation, their sacred obligation almost, as the owners or the supervisors of these companies, was every day we go to the Gemba, which is the work, where the work is actually happening, where the things are being made.
Right.
And we don't go there to direct, all that stuff your 5 of the 10 would think that they're out there for, to catch people doing things wrong.
Right.
They go there to appreciate, to admire, to witness the elegance of a process that goes as smoothly as designed on paper. So
Right.
you're in that business. And so I want you to tell me about the 5 who do listen to you, and what sorts of things do they change as a result of your influence.
Yeah. One of the strengths and weaknesses of American culture is our fierce independence.
Yep.
That is, has helped make us a great nation, but it also rails against kind of what you just described. Everybody wants to do their own thing. My wife
Get
and
the
I
credit.
yeah, right,
Yeah.
right. There's a lot of ego, independence. The John Wayne character who saves the day by himself. That old school mentality. So there isn't a lot of that fierce alignment where we are as concerned about the person next to us in the boat. My wife and I just watched Boys in the Boat a couple nights ago. We're kind of late to the game on that show, and the coach kept saying, "You're not 8 rowers. You're as one. You're 8 rowers as one."
Yeah, that's a wonderful story.
It's a wonderful story, right? So all these different variety of backgrounds and personalities, the coach was able to meld into one seamless team that was going in the direction that they thought was going to help them win. So to your question, getting those 5, we'll use that ratio that I use, getting those 5 to see themselves as a leader rather than a manager. That's one of the first mental transitions. I want you to see yourself as an orchestra conductor, a crew boat leader, and you're pulling all these different musical voices together, these instruments together to play in harmony and to play a symphony. They first have to change the way they see themselves before they can have any impact on the organization.
Yeah.
So getting them to think differently about their own leadership style. And a lot of that means they have to face the imposter syndrome and their own insecurities and fears. And so pulling them from their own shadows is a big part of what we do as well.
Yeah, I get it. There's a sense that if they look like you just described them, and that they look weak, that they would lose their authority.
Right.
We've heard all these, my power would go down. And the wonderful contradiction to that is, if anything, their power goes up when they start to see it your way. I'm sure there have been some moments when you can recall where you had work with a particular individual or even a team of senior leaders, and suddenly they boing, we get it.
Yeah.
That must feel good.
Oh, it feels amazing to watch a team transform right in front of your eyes, from a bunch of individuals doing their own thing, paddling their boat in their own direction, and watching them come into alignment, understand that working together, they're going to be far more efficient, profitable, effective. Retention is going to go up. Profits are going to go up. Irritations are going to go down. When they start to see it work, the light comes on. That's absolutely a very validating and fulfilling moment for sure.
I bet it is. How do you, there's a technique we could talk about for hours, but how do you stay with them long enough so that, because I know I've been trying to manage my weight since the 60s. And when I let myself off of a program like Weight Watchers, I immediately find another 20 pounds to stuff into my body. So I go back, and while there's wonderful tools, still I have to keep myself close to that process to,
Yeah.
so, if it was a one and done great speech, you won't
Yeah.
get to see that. But on
No.
the other hand, you're not scalable as a person, HR. I mean, you got to be able to stretch yourself out into the
Yeah.
various places where you want to help make that
Yeah.
transformation. So
Yeah.
how do you do it?
So logistically, you're right. One and done. Fly in, give a speech, have a half day workshop. That's not going to do almost anything. So our engagements are usually our very common engagement is 12 months long.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, we're with the company for 12 months doing deep dives, peeling back the layers, uncovering the messes. So there's two parts to that. So we're with their team, their management team, executive team, sometimes the smaller companies, their entire team. We're with them once a month in half day workshops. And then we're with the leaders doing once a month coaching behind the scenes, working on all the head trash, all the stuff that we've been talking about, how they see themselves, how to lead differently, how to think differently about organizations and human systems. And so I think it takes us about a year to really make the kind of impact that we're looking forward to making.
Now, the
Yeah.
next question always is, how does it last? How well does it last? Do we start seeing? I mean, we're humans here, you and I,
Yeah.
and we know
Oh, for sure.
we know how to fall back into some of the old ways, particularly let's talk a bit about, because their environment, the externals,
Yeah.
are hitting them really hard. They're not rolling that boat down a nice smooth
That's
river
right.
now.
That's a
They're
fact.
out there in what my colleague Peter Vale called white water.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
so a year I get, and I'm sure that their pocketbook would not want to keep you coming forever. But on the other hand, you have to be building in some new habits of collaboration and so forth, or there will be some some loss
That's
of the
right.
good that they've already achieved.
Yeah, that's right. They'll put the 20 pounds right back on. Using your Weight Watchers analogy. No, I I don't know that I can say 100%, but it's going to be pretty close to 100% of them ask us to continue on in some fashion after that.
Yeah.
For the very reason that you just said.
Yeah.
We need the accountability, we need the check-ins, we need the touch points. So normally after that, we'll stay with them and we come in quarterly and we work with the leader still monthly.
Yeah.
So we'll coach with the leaders monthly and then fly in quarterly to touch base with the team and just do some health checks and do some workshop stuff. So you're right. It can't be a cold cutoff for sure. They'll just go back to where they were.
I know we talked a little bit about the John Waynes. Well, in our field, yours and mine, there's always been some sort of like hero gurus,
Yeah.
like Tim Robbins there, Tony Robbins,
Tony Robbins.
and a lot of other very motivational people, and they
Sure.
have systems. There's no question. I
No
mean,
doubt.
they're not just, but they give the impression that if they could bring in someone to give a really powerful talk, that they're good. All right, we've covered that. And of course, I never saw that work at all. But on the other hand, at least it gets some blood pumping and some curiosities like, hey, the boss is bringing in someone who's telling us that we can consider change. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
Now the work has to be in. And it's work, isn't it? It's work these guys have to do to change their ways.
Oh, it's absolute work. You have to roll up your sleeve. All of us, when we're faced with change, going back to your losing that 20 pounds. If we don't change our diet or exercise or sleep habits or drinking water, without change, there's no change, right? If everything stays the same, then everything stays the same.
So the thought's there, right? But the deed isn't, and I get that from looking at your materials. You got to put it into action. You've got to execute.
Yes.
And so and I would say, like, why? Hey, is HR watching? No, he's not. Okay, great. Let's. No, HR is always watching.
Right. I mean, where we make our bread is in accountability. I mean, what we're known for is, so the three things we say that we do that sets us apart is we interrogate reality, provoke creativity, and inspire change. So those are action word. Interrogate. provoke, inspire. Accountability and who, what, by when are major milestones in everything that we do.
I
We just
see
don't
it.
we don't have conversations. We have conversations that end with, okay, what's the action item? When's your deliverable due? So by next month, you're going to do this. Do I understand that right? There's always we make it a rule of thumb. We don't leave conversations without a who, what, by when.
It sounds so simple, but folks, if you're listening to this, take it from a very old 81-year-old guy who's seen it and done a lot of it all. It is the toughest thing, not only to ask and not blink, but for the people to actually deliver on those real promises. They're promises.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, the work, we all know, busy, busy, busy. Hey, we got stuff, it's going out the loading dock. We must be doing all right. What do we need all this? In my field back in the day was Kaizens. Well, why do we need all that? Why do we need the Kanban? Why don't we just haul the stuff out and stick it on the truck? All that stuff. We had in the systems that I was on the board of a company that did what you're talking about.
Okay.
We had the almost lockdown accountabilities in order for the quality systems to work. I mean, really had to screw them down sociologically, make sure that people are going to do it, because it was the reputation of the system. In this case, it was the Duran system that was at stake. So here's HR Huntsman going in with his leader's edge. And if they're not doing those when, what, and wheres and all of that, over time, it's your reputation as a person, as a business, that it's at least in the background. And then some guy's out at the country club and he says, "Hey, Bob, who is helping you?" Huntsman. I just noticed that, you did some layoffs. Was that intentional? And no, we lost, we took our eye off that ball and found our costs overrode. Well, was that built into your plan? Or no, it wasn't. Have you been in touch with HR? No, I haven't. I'm just painting one of your nightmares for you on this call.
And I want to make clear to your listeners that in our methodology, and this is probably different from the older school approach, our methodology is very collaborative. So we don't come in and give those metrics or measurables or KPIs, or we work with the team. So it's not a micromanagement top-down system for us, because I don't know most of the industries that we work with. I don't know spinal surgery. I don't know aircraft manufacturing. I don't know most of the industries that we get asked to come in and help. So we work with the team to develop those metrics, those deliverables. And what we found, and this won't be a surprise to you or probably most of your listeners, is that when people collaborate on their own metrics, there's a far greater chance of ownership and success than if they're just handed to them.
No question.
So we strongly believe in a collaborative effort in creating these metrics.
So if they made them, then they live them. And I think that's a wonderful way. And it is different than what I was telling you about was a bit old school now, because it was, they bring in the methodology and they teach it out. It was better than nothing. But you're right. One of the real complaints and worries was, how long can we keep, will they keep using our system? And before it looks like our system is broken instead of them. But I didn't like that aspect, but I do like what I hear you saying. Now, as we're moving on the clock here, I want to know, you talk about we, and I mentioned earlier, you can't keep sending yourself out to all these locations. So have you built a team for your company? And if so, how have you found these people and what do they do?
Yes, we have a small team. I call us a surgical team. We're small, but we're incredibly impactful, and we bring great health to the organization. So we have a small team of 7, and I have 4 other associate coaches that work with me. I normally work at the founder, CEO level in the coaching aspect, and the other coaches will work at the VP or leader or manager level when it comes to the coaching.
And how did you put together this team? Because it sounds like it's not just anyone off the street. They have to be
No,
pretty much understanding what you mentioned about the social aspects
one
of the
100%.
business. They can't just be, techies or experts in
No,
surgical instruments. They've got to be people experts.
you have to be people experts. So when I retired from my first company, so I grew that to be pretty large. We had 200 staff in 5 countries around the world. When I retired, I said, I know what I want to do. I want to invest in leaders because I believe that leaders change the world. But I don't want a team that large anymore. I burned myself out, all kinds of horror stories and scar tissues with leadership mistakes that I made. I think Dave, I think I teach more from my failures and mistakes than any success that I've had, to be honest with you.
I'm glad you're being honest because most of us do.
Yeah, right. So I started Leaders Edge because I just want to invest in leaders, young leaders. I'm passionate about the next generation. Again, going back to my childhood, I want to pass on great health to connections to businesses. We spend about 90,000 hours at work in America in our lifetime. Let's make it meaningful and powerful and purposeful. So anyway, I said I just want to do this part-time and I want to work about 20 hours a week. That's just not my nature. And so my first associate coach I brought on board is my son. He's grown up in a leadership culture,
Great.
understands people very well. Then I have a former employee of mine, and he also is an associate coach, and then a retired pastor in the area as well. And I found that people that have worked with people for their whole life, they understand people, and every business is people business. So,
Yep.
so train them up, teach them, coach, and if you work with people your whole life, it's not that difficult of a transition to go
No,
into
isn't.
coaching. Go ahead.
But it isn't. But you can't do it if you're not so built, in a way. I
Yeah,
mean,
that's right.
it's got to be your nature because if anything else we've learned in the last few years, HR is about authenticity and
Yes,
how much we need to count on it in others
that's a fact.
and as well as our own. But since we've been separated so much with the pandemic and other reasons, when we finally are going to invite someone in, let's say into my company life,
Yeah,
the first 5 minutes, they're just like checking it out. Okay,
yeah,
this is someone we can listen to. This is someone who cares about our success, not just their own. And
right.
then from there it works out great. But
It
I'm
does.
delighted that your son is doing the work. Is he enjoying it as much as I
He's
assume he
he's
is?
he's absolutely enjoying it. His background, his field of study is in cybersecurity, and so he was going to initially he was going to launch the cybersecurity part of Leaders Edge, where we go in and we help companies, protect all their data, et cetera. And when he watched what I did and just got to see all the connections and the human transformation, he's like, Dad, I want to do what you do. Teach me how to do.
Ah,
It's already built in his DNA. He's grown up in the Huntsman household. We eat, sleep, and breathe leadership at every meal and every conversation. So he's a natural at it. Let me go back to something you just said, Dave, that I think is
sure.
really important, about people coming into an organization in today's day and age. I just read a Gallup poll, I think 3 days ago. 73% of Gen Zs are reporting either moderate or severe isolation. So we're theoretically the most connected we've ever been through Facebook and the social media. But in fact, the human connections, the social connections are suffering greatly.
Yeah.
And the American Psychological Association did a similar study, and they talked about how lonely people are.
Yeah.
And so when I talk to leaders, here's another way that I think leaders need to change their thinking is understand that if you can provide a healthy amount of connection at work and people feel seen, heard, and valued, where they are asked their opinion. And I'm not talking about you sit around singing kumbaya. We have work to do. We have deliverables to deliver. I'm not talking about, mushy feely, but I am talking about people knowing that they matter and their opinions are being mined and they're asking for their help. And we have these collaborative creative conflict sessions. That is just good business because you get their ideas and you get their buy-in and you help them they get more ownership and accountability because they feel part of an organization. We're the loneliest we've ever been. So leaders that can do that, Dave, they're going to win in the next decade.
That's a quote, man. I like to listen for quotes when I'm editing and then feature it when I put your episode out there. But the way you said it, as well as what you said, is important, HR. That I can see that that statistic really bothers you.
It does bother me.
It touches you, and maybe it goes all the way back. I'm not trying to be a shrink here, but it goes back to the years when you were acutely feeling that kind of loneliness as a kid. And
no doubt.
You just know, your empathy level is probably very high with people who don't feel connected to something that's valuable and makes them want to get up in the morning. And see, I'm looking at you and you look a whole lot younger than I, even though you mentioned retirement. I don't believe it. But you got some more runway ahead of you to work on this cause.
Oh, absolutely.
And so I'm handing you the baton.
Thank you, sir. I take the baton.
Well, no, I'll share the baton with you because I don't want to give up either. I have to do it here from my home office and talk to people and put it out on the podcast. But I'll tell you this, I do feel by having someone listen to a really wonderful person like you, having a conversation with me, and it's about how valuable a human being are really in this world. It's a little bit of encouragement for them to say, well, hey, maybe I'll pick up the phone and call my old friend I haven't talked to in years and make some connections again. So one way or another, if people can start getting back to, and I mean back to how it was when we were really connected and felt real identity with our church or our school or our business. It worked, and it worked very well, and it can work again. So please keep the Leader's Edge going, and just bring more of what you do and what your son and others of your team do to the world. HR Huntsman.
Thank you, sir. I plan on it.
Thank you for listening to the Practice Podcast, conversations probing the nature of practice. If you'd like to hear more, go to Automatic, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. And please consider purchasing our book on practice as a way of being at mylibrary.world. It's a digital book with lots of features that you do not see in a conventional book. So once again, thank you, and I look forward to you listening again.